How did Nauru transform from a prosperous paradise into a tragic downfall? Let's dive into 13 unusual and startling facts about this tiny nation. 13. Nauru became incredibly wealthy in the 1980s thanks to an unlikely resource: bird droppings. Centuries of accumulated droppings formed valuable phosphate deposits, a key ingredient in fertilizers. When global demand for fertilizers surged, Nauru's phosphate exports fueled an economic boom, making it the richest country in the world per capita. During the 1970s and 80s, Nauruans enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. The government covered education, healthcare, and housing, and there were no taxes. Citizens drove Cadillacs and invested in properties abroad, living in a material paradise. At its peak, Nauru's per capita GDP rivaled that of Saudi Arabia. However, phosphate reserves began to deplete in the late 1980s, and by 2011, mining was no longer viable. The collapse of the phosphate industry left Nauru in ruins, with abandoned luxury cars and decaying buildings. The island's economy crumbled, and the once wealthy nation became dependent on foreign aid. Environmental destruction and economic mismanagement turned this former paradise into a struggling, impoverished nation. 12. Nauru, once the richest country in the world, now holds a less enviable title: the highest obesity rate globally. About 80% of its population is overweight or obese, contributing to a severe health crisis. This issue stems from a mix of cultural values, historical wealth, and poor dietary choices. In the past, a large physique in Nauru was seen as a symbol of prosperity, particularly during the phosphate boom, when indulgence in food was celebrated. As the nation grew wealthier, Nauruans abandoned traditional diets for cheap, imported, unhealthy foods, leading to widespread obesity. As a result, life expectancy has plummeted, and chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension are rampant. A 2017 World Health Organization report ranked Nauru as the world's most obese nation, with 61% obesity and nearly 40% of the population suffering from diabetes. This health crisis has left Nauru grappling with the consequences of its past choices. 11. Nauru is one of the least visited countries in the world, drawing just around 200 tourists annually, even in its busiest years, barely reaching 1,000. Its remote location, over 3,000 kilometers from Australia's east coast, makes it difficult to access. Only Nauru Airlines flies to the island, with a limited and expensive schedule, requiring a 4.5-hour flight from Brisbane. Accommodation is also a challenge, with only 2 main hotels and a few guest houses. Securing a visa is another hurdle, as the process is known to be slow and complicated, adding to the difficulty of visiting. Due to these factors, remote location, limited flights, high travel costs, and challenging logistics, Nauru is far from a convenient tourist destination. Fewer than 15,000 people have ever visited, and it remains one of the world's least accessible and least visited countries. The lack of tourism infrastructure and the sense of isolation in the Pacific make Nauru a hidden gem, attracting only the most determined adventurers who are willing to overcome its many obstacles. When Nauru's economy collapsed after its phosphate resources were exhausted, the country faced severe corruption, unemployment, and financial ruin. In 2001, Australia made a deal with Nauru, paying the island to host a detention center for refugees trying to reach Australia. With few options, Nauru agreed, turning the nation into an open-air prison. Hundreds of refugees, including men, women, and children, are held in overcrowded and harsh conditions, often facing human rights abuses. Despite international criticism, including condemnation from the International Criminal Court, these camps remain in operation. Strict information control prevents outsiders from accessing the camps, and journalists are banned. In 2016, released the Nauru Files, exposing abuse and inhumane conditions within the camps. While the Australian government spends billions on these detention centers, it tightly controls information about their operations, sparking widespread criticism of its asylum policies. Nauru, a small island in the Pacific, remarkably escaped the COVID-19 pandemic without a single case, making it one of the few countries in the world to achieve this. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Nauru stands out as a rare success amid the global crisis. The island's success can be attributed to its early and decisive government actions. As soon as the pandemic began in early 2020, Nauru implemented strict quarantine and border control measures. The government quickly canceled international flights and enforced rigorous protocols for travelers. Being a remote island with a population of around 10,000 helped Nauru manage and monitor any potential threats effectively. With strict controls in place at its limited airport, Nauru was able to track and isolate any suspected cases, contrasting sharply with many countries that suffered extensive outbreaks. This extraordinary achievement highlights how Nauru's geographical isolation and prompt response enabled it to remain safe from COVID-19, making it a unique success story during the pandemic. While most countries have a designated capital city, Nauru is an exception. This independent nation does not have an official capital. Instead, the administrative area of Yaren serves this role. Located in the southern part of the island, Yaren houses essential government offices, the parliament, and embassies from countries like Taiwan and Australia. However, Yaren isn't a traditional city. It features simple buildings, a few main roads, and lacks the infrastructure typically associated with capital cities, such as skyscrapers or bustling shopping centers. With a total area of just 21 square kilometers, it takes little time to traverse the island, making a central city less necessary. Nauru's absence of an official capital reflects its unique character and simplicity, distinguishing it from most other nations worldwide. In 1982, Nauru became a significant stop on Queen Elizabeth II's South Pacific tour, marking a notable event for this small island nation that rarely appears on global travel itineraries. The Queen's visit was a tremendous honor for Nauru, placing Her Majesty in an exclusive club of places seldom seen by outsiders. With only about 200 tourists visiting Nauru each year, it is estimated that merely 15,000 people have ever set foot on the island, representing just 0.0002% of the global population. This highlights Nauru's isolation and uniqueness. If you're keen to join this elite group and boast about visiting Nauru, be prepared for a challenging journey. Nauru is the smallest island nation in the world, located in the remote Pacific Ocean, making it difficult to find on a map. It is almost entirely isolated, with the nearest island, Banaba, part of Kiribati, 300 kilometers away. To reach mainland Australia, a traveler must endure a 5-hour flight, covering about 3,000 kilometers. Honolulu, Hawaii, lies even farther at 4,000 kilometers to the northeast. With an area of just 21 square kilometers, slightly larger than Los Angeles International Airport, Nauru can be circumnavigated in about 30 minutes by car or explored in a day on foot. Its population of around 10,000 is comparable to a small city district. Since gaining independence in 1968, Nauru has operated as a sovereign nation, despite its size and lack of major tourist attractions. Although the island lacks rivers and UNESCO World Heritage Sites, Nauru offers a friendly atmosphere and mild climate, with temperatures ranging from 24 to 33 degrees Celsius year-round. It is surrounded by stunning coral reefs, making it a great destination for diving and exploration. First visited by British whaling captain John Farren in 1789, who noted its pleasant climate, Nauru remains a hidden gem for nature lovers. Despite attracting only about 200 tourists a year, the island's wild beauty and rich ecosystem provide a memorable experience for those who venture here. One unique aspect of Nauru is that it has no military forces. This may seem unusual, but Nauru relies on Australia for its security and defense instead of investing in its own armed forces. Under a long-standing agreement, Australia is responsible for defending Nauru in the event of any external threats. For small isolated nations like Nauru, not maintaining a military is common, as military expenses can be prohibitively high. Instead, Nauru prioritizes essential areas like healthcare, education, and social services. The island does have a small police force to handle internal security and law enforcement. With a population of around 12,000, it makes sense for Nauru to forego a large army and the costs associated with military equipment, opting instead for a more practical approach to national security. One of Nauru's distinctive features is its lack of personal income tax, a policy established during the island's prosperous phosphate mining era. During this golden age, the government funded most basic living expenses, including healthcare, education, and housing, eliminating the need for income tax. However, when Nauru's economy collapsed after depleting its phosphate resources, this absence of income tax became problematic. The government struggled to generate stable revenue for public services and became heavily reliant on foreign aid, particularly from Australia. As a result, Nauru now faces significant economic challenges, trying to sustain social services without external support while seeking new, sustainable income sources. Despite its small size, Nauru has a strong passion for sports, especially Australian rules football, which is the most popular sport on the island. Nauruans enthusiastically watch and play the game, reflecting the country's close ties to Australia. While Nauru lacks modern stadiums and sports facilities, its love for the game remains vibrant. Weightlifting is another significant sport in Nauru, where the nation has achieved remarkable success, particularly at the Commonwealth Games. With 10 gold medals in weightlifting, Nauru has outperformed larger countries like Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, and Hong Kong, earning pride and recognition on the international stage. Additionally, Rugby Sevens is gaining traction in Nauru, showing that the island continues to expand its sporting interests despite its size. In the 1960s, during the peak of phosphate mining, worries about Nauru's future surfaced. Environmental issues prompted discussions about relocating the entire Nauruan population to an island off Queensland, Australia. This proposal arose from concerns that rehabilitating Nauru would be prohibitively costly and nearly impossible due to extensive environmental damage. Australia's Prime Minister at the time, Robert Menzies, publicly recognized Australia's responsibility for Nauru's well-being, given the economic benefits Australia derived from the island's phosphate resources. He suggested that Australia, New Zealand, and the UK could potentially resettle the Nauruans to ensure their safety against climate change and mining impacts. However, the Nauruan people firmly opposed this relocation plan, asserting their desire to remain on their homeland. For them, Nauru was not merely a residence, it represented their cultural and national identity. Despite the grim outlook for the future, they chose to confront the challenges head-on and rebuild their lives on their cherished island. Nauru's official language is Nauruan, a Micronesian language that embodies the island's rich culture, history, and identity. With a population of approximately 12,000, the Nauruan language is central to daily communication for most residents. However, Nauruans are often multilingual due to the island's strong historical connections with Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. English, while not the native tongue, is widely spoken and serves as a second language for many. It is prevalent in formal and commercial contexts, including legal documents, government communications, and business transactions. The majority of Nauruans, particularly those involved in commerce, education, and public service, are proficient in English. This linguistic capability facilitates international communication and trade, enhancing economic opportunities. Furthermore, English proficiency allows Nauru to maintain diplomatic relations and engage in international cooperation more effectively, making it an integral part of the island's connectivity to the global community.